So, in response to a news story about a school in Maryland that forced its teachers to take down these set of three posters that really were featuring fairly neutral images of a Muslim woman in a American flag hijab, a Latino woman, and an African American woman. In response to that school's decision to force all the teachers to take those schools down, I felt it was really necessary to make a video response to not only that, but also the overall climate of things that are going on right now. The truth is that I'm feeling angry and frustrated. In the view of one political scientist, Joseph Overton, there's this theory that there's an acceptable range or window of public opinion known as the Overton window. That is to say that for a given time and political climate, some opinions are policy, some are popular, some are merely tolerated, and some are so radical that they are effectively unthinkable. For instance, slavery was once legal and an issue people had disagreements on. Now the thought of legalizing slavery would fall squarely outside of what modern society would tolerate, and for good reason. Where now civil rights is a law of the land, and no one would expect teachers to teach both sides of lynching, it was once controversial. Nor would they ever ask a teacher to be impartial about Holocaust denial, or the legitimacy of interracial marriage, which at one time was very controversial. Definitely a political issue. Some issues essentially leave the realm of politics and become an odious personal issue, something to be ashamed of that you keep secret. Or they just become so mainstream they're not even thought about. I feel like that before Donald Trump won the election, racists and homophobes were effectively shut out of the debate, which is good. Workplaces had, and for now still have, policies that frown on overt displays of racism and homophobia, misogyny. No one would consider giving equal time on Black History Month to people opposed to civil rights. As it happens, I am an educator. I used to be a teacher, but now I'm a tutor. I'm also a transgender. Many of my students are immigrants. Our guidelines, which I feel for good reason, discourage us from talking politics with our students. I feel that there's a good reason for that, but there are some caveats. I understand it's not fair for an adult to propagandize to children who are legally compelled to be there, but there is a problem with being apolitical. For some of us, it's effectively impossible. For me to be able to exist, to work as an educator, and to be LGBT is inherently political in the current climate, regardless of what I do or say in class. Why am I angry? The Trump administration issued an executive order revoking protections for transgender students. With the victory of Donald Trump, the Overton window has given legitimacy to fringe views, while at the same time civil rights, voting rights, the rights of minorities to live is now a political controversy. I keep seeing news stories of school districts bowing to pressure to take down pride flags, to roll back instruction in civil rights, to roll back ethnic studies programs, to roll back women's studies programs. A recent news story that I mentioned at the beginning features a school principal instructing teachers to take down a poster of an American flag hijab-wearing woman along with two other posters because it was political. How? What case or controversy is it? That the Muslims are Americans? Is this debate territory now? A local school here in Chicago, the Chicago area, in Elgin, is getting opposition for doing a seminar on civil rights for Black History Month with serious calls for the seminar to be canceled. Why? Because civil rights are left-wing. There aren't enough conservative voices in civil rights. Yeah. All of this is because Trump's election has legitimized opposition to civil rights and the dehumanization of minorities of various kinds. The truth is that while I do not approve of using one's position as a teacher to spread personal politics, the fact is that effectively everything is potentially political depending on where that Overton window is. For many of us, our day-to-day lives are a political statement. Neutrality, as it's understood in our culture, is, when broken down, is effectively a bias. Neutrality is a privilege for people who do not experience marginalization. The truth is not necessarily in the middle when the debate concerns your right to exist, to not be lynched, to not have one's immediate family be deported. The call to be impartial and neutral is really, in effect, a call to be normal, to live inside the framework of our oppressors. Good news for me is that I teach math, which, while not immune to politics, is somewhat insulated from them. Still, it is impossible not to see and hear the effects. These students of mine, most of whom are immigrants, had their president tell them that they and their families were rapists. Their president is in the process of getting a colossal monument to racism built in the form of a border wall. Their president has had his press secretary seriously say that an infant refugee was a security threat, to the point where it was justified to put the baby in handcuffs. And I feel like I'm next. With the recent targeting of trans folks in the Trump executive order, a little more legitimacy is granted to folks who say or insinuate that trans women are mentally ill perverts. We're not proper people anymore. We're controversies. Telling our stories in ethnic studies classes, women's studies classes, seminars, or electives is being political according to the centrist view. Meanwhile, you look in a lot of history textbooks and see the narrative of those who oppress us passed off as objective truth. America is the greatest country on earth. The founding fathers elevated to virtual sainthood despite being slave owners, rapists, and drunks. All of human history is the story of great men, women and people of color reduced to background characters and props. The illegal conquest of the northern half of Mexico is described as a purchase in one textbook that I read. The overthrow of democratically elected governments by the CIA to be replaced with mass graves and tyrants like Pinochet is presented as defeating communism. We tell elementary school students that in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but of course, let's completely forget the genocide that followed. Even when I was a child, for Thanksgiving, the school that I attended when I was in kindergarten dressed me up as a horrifically offensive Native American caricature. Really? That's considered to be apolitical. But a picture of a woman with a hijab is too much? 1 month of the year where we celebrate Black history is too political? If a celebration of the humanity of people of color is an offense against conservatives, then maybe they shouldn't have been and should not continue to be constant enemies of marginalized groups. We are at war for the soul of our country. Respect our existence or expect resistance. We have seen previously buried debates rise from the grave in a chorus of, what about the straight white men? There is no more neutrality, and there never was. Bigots and conservatives need to go back to being afraid again. The truth is not somewhere in the middle. We will not teach both sides. We will stand up for immigrants, for refugees, for Black folks, for queer folks, for voting rights, for healthcare, for facts, for women, for the environment, for a living wage, and we're not going to let Trump's ignorant white trash control the narrative.